I did an internship for my MDiv, and part of it involved doing CPE, clinical pastoral education, where I saw God in the trenches of human life. And I, who had shied away from funerals before doing CPE and any kind of end of life situation, I didn't think I was capable or qualified to be God's representative in those moments because I hadn't been exposed to a lot of death in my childhood. But what amazed me in having to be there when people were dying was noticing how death has really lost its sting because of identifying the presence of God in that thin space between life and the next life. And it changed my whole understanding of dying. And so, leaving that CPE experience and going back into the congregational life, I found that preaching funeral sermons were places where I could offer hope because I believe in the resurrection and I believe in the presence of God in life and in death. And so I can preach that way. And from the reactions of people, that's where I have some of my greatest impact.
Yes, so we talk a lot in homiletics. I'm sure your classes, this comes up. We talk about homiletical method, homiletical theory, right? And we ask preachers to think about that. But when we talk about theology of preaching, there are some themes, motifs, statements that come up again and again in our preaching. And so my question for you is, would you say, or would you agree with the statement that your theology of preaching involves God in the trenches? That line that you shared stuck with me. Would you say that your theology of preaching embodies that visage of God?
Absolutely. The concept of Emmanuel, God with us, for me is God always with us. And I believe that because I've experienced that in my own trenches. Trenches. I've seen God in ways that I would not have seen God otherwise. And it brings back a thought to me that I think I read in the Psalms or in Proverbs. It might have been in the Psalms. Those who go down to the sea in ships, they are the ones who see the wonders of God in deep waters. And so understanding that there is no God-forsaken place on this earth, or no God-forsaken situation. I actually believe that.
Yes.
And I can give people the benefit of that belief when I preach. It comes across as genuine. Yes, that situation sucks.
Yes.
And God is there. And so, God in the trenches, it can happen in so many different ways. As a chaplain in training, I remember sitting with a family going through the most horrendous loss and saying nothing. I mean, there were no words. And at the end of the hour and a half or two or whatever, however long they were in the waiting room, the mother of the deceased person comes up to me and gives me this huge hug. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I want to ask, thank you for what? But that's not appropriate. I'm asking myself, what is she grateful for? And in the sessions with the supervisor, I'm asking that question, and he said, your presence was representative of God's presence in that room.
Yes.
And I got to understand that sometimes I don't have to say anything but just be there, and God is there in the trenches. So if I can be in the trenches of life with someone, there is God. And that comes across in my preaching, that people who ask where God is in life's ugly, bizarre situations, there's an answer for that. One of the most difficult sermons that I have ever preached was of a 12-year-old model girl who was brutally sexually abused and murdered. And the grandparents, who were my clergy colleagues, asked me if I would preach the Sunday following her death. It was Valentine's Day. And I struggled with what can you say? It was just so horrific. It was all in the newspaper, the local newspapers. There were people who just were trying so hard to comprehend why. The beautiful little girl, innocent. And the word that came to me for that sermon came out of the Song of Solomon. Love is as strong as death. And somehow I was able to wrap a sermon around that thought and deliver it in that church on that Sunday morning, and still have people telling me what an impact that was. But it was because I firmly believed that even in that cruelty, that bizarre way to die, that God was present with that girl. You couldn't convince me otherwise.